Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to Cause Before Symptom. I am your esteemed guest host, Urban. It is just now May 24th here on the East Coast. Hope everybody's doing well. It's Sunday. Weeks and weekends fly by anymore. It seems like Memorial Day Monday. It may rain here, at least. It's kind of been shoddy weather throughout the country. You know, things are like that anymore. You never know what you're going to get. How's it going, everybody who's here? I saw Scorpion, I saw Boots just said hello. Thanks for being here with us. The usuals, we're on YouTube, we're on a few different platforms. X, we're on both Rumbles, we're on Substack, we're on Odyssey. We're also, I think I'm on Facebook tonight as well. See how well that does. Sometimes I don't usually stream there because when I do, they usually take me off for some stupid reason. It's just it's something you can't even predict because of how absurd it is. And then so I'm gonna try it tonight to see if we can get through it. So if not, no big deal. Substack has been the best platform for me. I've got, you know, the most traffic on there. I've also got Urban Odyssey, like the podcast, which is on all the different podcast players. Apparently got an email saying that Apple Podcasts will have compatibility with video episodes later this year. So later this year, they will also allow me to send video episodes, video podcast episodes, which is a new thing that they didn't allow me to do before. So I host the podcast with Spotify, which means if I upload a video episode, Spotify will get the video episode. But all the other podcast players, I'm on pretty much all of them. Amazon, I'm on Apple, and it's usually if you publish to one or two of them, that will distribute to all the other ones. And then those get audio. So, but yeah, I've got most of my followers on Substack and podcast. But I've actually got a presence on all kinds of different platforms. James just started a new YouTube channel. He's going to try to stream on YouTube in addition to Rumble, which you know, YouTube is apparently a guy that I have talked to, not much, but briefly. Hidden America is the guy's name, or his channel. He basically had an issue with AI flagging his channel or his content, and he discovered, he got a hold of YouTube. He got a hold of a person, and the person informed him that they were completely powerless to this AI flagging software. Basically, if AI flags your video on YouTube, even the people who work at YouTube, according to what they told my buddy Hidden America, his channel. So it seems that way because every time I've ever gotten in trouble on YouTube, every single one of them, it has not been for anything that was, it's nothing that would have even registered as this is a concern before I even put it up there. Because generally it's like, if it's not going to take away from the content or whatever, I usually won't, like if it's a minor little fix or wording or something, sometimes I will do that just to prevent the video getting censored or whatnot. But it's pretty crazy. You can't even predict these things. In music, it's like if you use music that for instance, if you were doing a live stream with your phone and you were just walking through a mall or something and they were playing music on the radio, you could get flagged for that. You probably would get flagged for that. It's just ridiculous stuff like that. How's it going, Philip? Nice to see you tonight. Let's put this up here. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Yes, I do hope everybody's having a wonderful Memorial Day weekend and hopefully not getting rained out. Actually, it was nice here today, so I think a lot of people we're probably going to go and just get it out of their system today. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the quote-unquote the structure of magic. It's the title of a book, but it's actually talking about the subtitle of the book is a book about communication and change, language and therapy, talking about the source code of reality map versus territory and overall the power of language. This is talking about the structure of magic, understanding that magic in this context is word. It's the word, is language, is the power of the written word. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring the display up. Let's see, Philip said that it rained out in New York City. That's unfortunate. How's the, is it chaotic down? I've never been to a big city like that. I don't travel. I've not been anywhere like that. So I don't really have I can't put my toes in the water to judge from where I'm sitting. But I perceive, the way I perceive places like that is basically hell on earth. It's like I don't even know if I would want to go there, because I feel like to navigate, find a place to park, try to find the location, it's actually more trouble than it's worth to me. That's how I perceive it. Maybe I'm wrong though. So actually, as a matter of fact, before this, we're going to take a look at something really quick. So the definitions from Webster's 1913 dictionary. Sophistry, the art or process of reasoning and logic, the practice of a sophist. Sophistry, the root Sophia, sophistry. This is an example. The juggle of sophistry consists, for the most part, in using a word in one sense in the premise, and another sense in the conclusion. And so this is what George Orwell would actually call doublespeak, as it reads to me. It seems like this is just an early understanding of doublespeak. Let's see, Philip said Hudson Valley, Catskills area. Yeah, that's unfortunate that it rained out on Memorial Day weekend. I hope you didn't have any plans that you had to cancel or anything like that. At least maybe you'll get to rest or something. I'm not sure. Okay, sophistry. And then I was just going to give you a short little glimpse at the primary two texts that we're going to be looking at today. And it forms the backbone, along with some text on cybernetics, of the slides we're going to look through today, and what we're going to talk about. So this is 2 volumes. First one, The Structure of Magic, a book about language and therapy, by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. 1975. And appreciations for giving us her intuitions about people. These intuitions are the basis of what follows in this book. Here's the table of contents. It starts out discussing the structure of choice, the structure of language. And guys, I'll be completely honest with you. I actually had discovered this text, The Structure of Magic. I've had this sitting in a drive. I found it when I was looking into neuro-linguistic programming. But as a matter of fact, the point is, meta keeps popping up everywhere. Meta this, meta cognition, meta atom, meta surface, meta hologram. That's a real thing, meta hologram. And I did actually tell you guys that I would show you what I'm not necessarily sure, but this is a hologram, and I'm sure that whatever a meta hologram is can be better than what I'm about to show you. So take that with a grain of salt, but I still thought it was cool. Let me pull it up. Here we go. just at some venue or something, but you know, that's what a hologram can do now that the entertainment industry has. And I'm telling you, if you would like to go and watch my video that I did on meta atoms and meta optics, I give a very basic, as I was kind of learning along with everybody as I was presenting this topic because I wanted to know more about it. So it was a very basic introduction to what this is. And you know, I might as well show people that as well, because I do have a short little clip of it.
After years of technology development and rigorous testing, our first generation chips are now in commercial deployment. Our product is targeted at enabling solid-state LiDAR. In this market, it's been a long-standing dream to replace the bulky mechanical beam steering devices with a solid-state option. To this end, Lumotive has developed the world's first one-axis, CMOS-based beam steering device called the LM10. The LM10 is capable of very wide field of view beam steering, up to 160 degrees. Lumotive has also developed a compact method for coupling light onto the LM10 using a prism, and this is typically how our customers deploy the LM10 in their LiDAR systems. This is our demonstration kit, which highlights the full capabilities of the LM10 chip. For the purposes of this demonstration, we beam steer the infrared light onto a special screen, which converts that infrared light into green light so that it can be seen by the human eye. In sweep mode, we see the LCM sweeping our 160-degree total field of view from left to right, dwelling at each angle for the same.
So let me just clarify. What he said was that that's not a laser being shot. What that is that is a crystal. They're sending an invisible to the eye particle to that surface. And this is, you know, for the purpose of demonstration, they're showing that this meta surface in the crystal can bend the actual particle beam. It's a demonstration that's very simplified because for something like this, you know, a lot of people don't, the implications are still not known to what can be done with this, at least to me.
Amount of time. ROI mode showcases how the LCM's programmable beam steering can be used to define certain regions of interest in the field of view, where we would like to spend more time measuring. These regions of interest are completely user-defined and can be changed instantaneously. With this capability, the LCM can interact with its environment in a much more natural way, doing a coarse overview sweep and then tracking specific objects of interest. You could imagine an automotive LiDAR taking advantage of this ability to have two different operating modes. A city driving mode, where you want the full field of view scan for maximum visibility, and a highway driving mode, where you spend most of your time measuring the horizon to gain maximum range. With Lumotive's LCM technology, one system can switch between many operating modes on the fly. We can even send out multiple beams simultaneously to cover more of the field of view at one time. In user mode, we link the LCM steering angle to a touchpad to demonstrate how it offers the ultimate flexibility among beam steering devices. As you can see from this demo, the Lumotive LCM technology represents a new era in programmable.
I was actually very glad that
our website at lumotive.com. Thank you for watching.
I was actually very glad that this clip exists, because in order to do the video that I did, I had to have something to demonstrate, to at least give people some type of visual. And there's not actually really many visuals of a meta atom. You know, there's conceptualizations and formulas, but that's actually a really nice demonstration. So yeah, this stuff is at that level, and that's just, they're building sales demonstration models. So back to our point here, why is it that meta is popping up in The Structure of Magic, which is a book from 1975, meta. Okay, chapter 4, incantations for growth and potential into the vortex on becoming a quote-unquote sorcerer's apprentice. Structure of the final incantation in book 1. And then it talks about transformational grammar, syntactic environments, that is how words are arranged and how that arrangement affects their meaning, for identifying natural language presuppositions in English, and it gives you a basic glossary as well. That's volume 1. Volume 2 is a bit shorter. Talks about representational systems, maps for the same territory, incongruity, fuzzy functions, family therapy in terms of family groupings of words, and notation, etc. So this is all about language. I just wanted to give people a little idea of what we're going to be basing everything off of. So, and again, you know, this book was just laying around, and Meta pops up. All right. In the structure of magic, Richard Bandler and John Grinder explore how language, sorry, I'm just getting my bearings straight. There we go. How language and mental models shape human experience and the process of change. The authors argue that individuals do not interact with the world directly, but rather through subjective maps that are often limited by generalizations, deletion, and distortions. These linguistic and cognitive filters can lead to an impoverished model of reality, causing people to feel trapped or paralyzed by a perceived lack of choices. Today we would call this learned helplessness. By applying transformational grammar and specific verbal techniques, the book provides a meta model for therapists to identify and challenge these restrictive patterns. The systematic approach allows practitioners to help clients expand their internal representations, thereby uncovering new options for behavior and emotional relief. Ultimately, the text demonstrates that the magic, quote-unquote magic, performed by effective therapists is actually a structured, learnable skill rooted in the syntax of communication. The subtitle for the first volume is A Book About Language and Therapy. The first volume introduces a transformational model of therapy that examines how human beings use language to represent experience. The authors argue that people suffer not because the world is limited, but because their internal models of the world are impoverished by linguistic distortions, like deletions, nominalizations, and universal quantifiers. By utilizing a specialized meta-model, therapist can challenge these restricted surface structures to recover the richer, deep structure of a client's actual life. This process functions as a map for change, allowing individuals to break through semantically ill-formed generalizations and reclaim a wider range of creative choices and potential. That's the first volume. Now the second volume, with the subtitle, A Book About Communication and Change. The second volume explores how individuals construct internal representational systems, such as visual, auditory, and kinesthetic maps, to interpret their reality, noting that these personal models often limit human potential when they become rigid or incongruent, cognitive dissonance, incongruent. The authors provide a formal framework for therapists to identify semantic ill-formedness. So the second volume is talking more about the mechanics of how this works, the notation, etc. Semantic and syntactic, such as, quote-unquote, meaning their term, mind reading or fuzzy functions, where a person's linguistic output fails to align with their sensory experience. By utilizing specific meta tactics, like matching predicates and sorting physical stances, practitioners can help clients bridge the gap between their mental maps and the actual territory of their lives. Ultimately, the text aims to provide a structural language of growth that enables people to integrate conflicting internal polarities and reclaim a sense of creative agency and self-worth. Okay, so what's interesting about this, and seeing as last week we covered Thomistic psychology, Thomistic philosophy in a basic sense, based on St. Thomas Aquinas' general writings and way of thinking. And we looked at that in the context of cybernetics. And so this is also kind of looking from that perspective in a very similar manner. It's looking almost from a Thomistic lens, because when you go to a traditional psychiatrist, they're concerned with what you tell them, what your history and documented history is, and what you, the term they use is what you present with. Do you present with the qualifications based on the DSM? If you do, well then congratulations, you get another mark in the history, which builds for the next one, the next provider or doctor that you see. They're not concerned with, in this case, the actual territory of your life. They're not concerned with what's going on when you're actually at home, what goes on with your family, what goes on inside of you, which takes more time than a 15-20 minute appointment to get into that. So I that's why I think this is really interesting to look at, and it also does lend to my point that I've made probably more than any in the time that I've guest hosted for Cause Before Symptom, or probably even in the other shows that I've done on my own, is that language is very important. And that's, that's why it had that, George Orwell, who wrote 1984 among a few other books, he's become almost a figure in linguistics now, because people who talk about doublespeak and Orwellian states, he's kind of transcended just being an author. He's almost a philosopher in a way, and it's because he understood, just like St. Thomas Aquinas understood very early, he lived a long time ago, that languages are important. Something I heard from one of the guys, Father Chadwick Berger, who I was listening to, talking about this. He said that Pope Benedict made a comment saying that he hated that Thomas Aquinas was so clear. I think that's what was said, that he hated that he was so clear, that he had clarity. And so something to think about there. And I think it was because he understood the power of words, is why Thomas Aquinas had that clarity. Because you can follow the logic. It's hard to, you would read it and you were like, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I definitely get where he's coming from. And it has that mystical element that's inherent to all of us, because for instance, you look at the architecture now, it's all cube and black and gray. You can even look at the color of photos on the internet. Everything's getting grayer. But, you go back 200, 300 years and you could see the presence of this mystical element to which I am referring. Okay, so everybody knows the 5 channels of input. Let me pull my little stage strings back here to move myself over so everybody can see. Everybody knows the 5 input channels. First is visual, with your eyes. Probably the most major channel for processing light, color, and movement. The most important is probably your sight. Auditory, your auditory senses are, as far as I believe, are the only one of your 5 senses that actually involve physical bones. There are bones in your body, which are the smallest bones in your body, in your ear. You have 3 different bones in your ear, but they're like the tiniest of bones in your body. And it's the only one of your senses that involves actual bones. Sound, rhythm, and tone. The kinesthetic, body, touch, sensations. A major channel for processing physical feelings, pressure, temperature, and proprioception. I've not heard that word before. Gustatory, taste. A less utilized channel for processing chemical flavors. And olfaction, your sense of smell, olfactory senses, which are very close to the part of your brain that deals with intense emotions. Sometimes the smell can trigger an intense emotion. That's why. Okay, let me move myself again. The complexity of our experience arises from a dual-layered process. First, neurophysiologists, neurophysiologists. See, that right there, you guys who are here to hear me struggle with these big words, and that is actually you witnessing what I meant last night. I actually learned quite a bit because there's no a high school student right now would probably not have any need to read that word unless they were going into a major like that. And so it gives me a reason to exercise that muscle. So neurophysiologists, I butchered it again. Neurophysiologists distinguish between a specialized receptors within a single channel. Such as chromatic cones and non-color rods in the visual channel, or the specialized receptors for pressure and temperature in the kinesthetic channel. Second, our brains perceive higher order complexity through the combination of these stimulations. And the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. For instance, the sensation of wetness is... When I was in my senior year of high school, this big controversy erupted, and everybody had to get to the bottom of the question: is water wet? I will never forget that. Is water wet? The sensation of wetness is not the result of a single receptor. It is a recurring pattern of several different kinesthetic receptors firing in unison. It's a combination. Similarly, texture is often a multimodal synthesis of visual, kinesthetic, and sometimes auditory data. Once this data passes through these gateways, it must be stored and organized within our internal systems. Okay, remember representation. It's spelled that way for a reason. It's a representation of an original experience. That's actually what a ghost and a phantom is. And it's actually kind of, obvious when you hear it. But yeah, a ghost and a phantom in the realist sense is a representation of an original experience, a memory. Similar, so your memory, when you think back to these things, or when you communicate these to other people, and then everybody starts to misremember it. And it's similar to how a recording would deteriorate. If I handed you a tape that I recorded from somebody else, and then you recorded that tape and you gave it to somebody else, and if this went on and on and on, every time that happened, it would deteriorate a little bit. And your memory kind of works this way with time. In the Thomistic video, these were two terms that came up, and they were probably the most important two. A phantasm, a sensible representation of an original experience provided by the internal senses, which serves as the material from which the intellect abstracts ideas. This is the cogitative power, an interior sense or a material faculty that perceives intentions or insensate qualities such as utility versus harm, and associates images in the imagination with data in memory to make an initial assessment under the guidance of intellect. So these two things together can deteriorate with time. And they actually, for instance, think of the internet or a rumor that gets out. It starts to take on a personality. It starts to take on a weight, a character in and of itself. And I'll give you an example of that. Probably the best example of that. Well, two, as a matter of fact. I've showed you this before, the disintegration loops. So this guy did exactly that, an album of tape loops where, you know, he was kind of making music out of this deterioration. But he actually ended up finishing and completing this project on 9/11. In September 2001, electronic composer William Basinski uncovered a series of tape loops of found sound he had recorded from an easy listening station in the 1980s and decided to preserve them as digital files. Yet, as each recording circulated through the spindle of Basinski's recording machine, on its way to being digitized, it slowly became clear that the tape was deteriorating in the process, shredding and splintering away as it was being transferred into bits and bytes, being physically consumed as it was being digitally reproduced. The resulting recordings became their own composition, not a digital copy of the analog material, but rather a kind of haunted simulacrum, a profoundly inexact copy that lacked an original precisely because it documented the original's disappearance. And again, he recorded the last daylight hour of 9/11 from his rooftop and synced this video to the first and longest loop. The combination of image and sound is uncanny. So here is the example that I can best provide. Over time, our memories deteriorate in the same way as tape loops. Each time you retell a story to someone and then they retell it to somebody else, specific details become lost, either due to simply misremembering the details or because our judgment could be clouded with emotional bias to the memory. So what does it look like when the ghosts of the past gain footing in the present? Well, this whole concept of hauntology came from a book called Spectres of Marx, so in reference to communism. But the past begins to hold real weight and power in the present. That's why everything that's been done in the last 10 years has been justified to make America great again. That's why this phrase is so, it holds so much weight for this period of time. This, last 10 to 15 years, that will have been a very, popular phrase. And it's been made into um, a rallying call of sorts, but it's deeper than that. It takes on a personality of its own. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So now it's actually make Israel great again. Everybody knows that. So now it's the usurped states of Zionism and the Central Intelligence Agency. All right, so now we're going to take a look at some basic slides on the structure of magic, in addition to cybernetics, some basic text on cybernetics. So this is from the structure of magic here. The map is not the territory. The glitch. Humans never operate directly on the world. We operate on a map created by neurology and language. The simulation, reality is filtered through representational systems that guide behavior, often erroneously. The pain point, pain exists in your model of the world, not the world itself. And it's like, does it have, like, does the whole world have a thing called a neuron, or a ability to feel sense? Not in the same way humans would. So it's more like the whole cumulative sum of all of the processes, but those come together in the same way as a human body or a corporate body does. It's a gestalt. Again, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The truth, magic is simply a structure you haven't decoded yet. The three sensors. So I've said this quite a few times, but I was told, and when I went to Introduction to Psychology by my teacher, who is a great teacher, he said that we take in information through our five senses, as we covered just a minute ago, our five senses. We do something with it. This is a hypothesis on what we're doing with it. Again, the structure of magic uses the terms generalization, deletion, and distortion. And then to finish that off, we would act back out into the environment, behavior. So between you and reality, three universal modeling processes filter the original, or filter the signal, my bad. Filter the signal, the raw data. First process, generalization, detaching specific experience to create universal rules. Deletion, selectively ignoring data to prevent sensory overload. Distortion, shifting perception until the map no longer represents or resembles the terrain. The map, when it says map, your perception of something versus what it actually is, the map versus the territory. Linguistic programming, surface versus deep structure. So the surface structure is the tip of the iceberg. Now down here, that's where you got all of the juicy stuff going on. The deep structure is the full unconscious linguistic representation of experience. Surface structure, the impoverished sentence actually spoken. Everybody's heard that the devil is in the details. So, people try to communicate, for instance, if I try to communicate something that I have experienced, that, for the most part, I'm not expecting whoever I'm explaining it to have experienced it. So I have to use adjectives. I have to use descriptive tools to try and communicate that to another person. But the gravity and all the fine details get lost. And it's like signal noise. The devil is in the details. So that's to say that silence, pure silence, is probably the best form of truth that we as humans have access to. Somebody told me once that silence is actually a setting or a place in which your thoughts occur. That silence was a location in which your thoughts occur, or it's like a stage. So if you're paying attention to me, you're giving me the ability to put stuff on that stage for you. Data loss. Meaning is stripped away during transmission via deletions primarily. The objective is to reconnect the surface ghost to the deep reality. The meta model, piercing the veil. The meta model is a linguistic weapon to challenge the simulation. Nominalizations. The illusion of turning a process into a static thing. An example, I have depression versus I am feeling depressed. Again, I have depression versus I am feeling depressed. That's an example of nominalization. Mind reading, claiming to know another's internal state without sensory evidence, which is very common now. People, it's like you will reply to something from somebody you've never met before, and all of a sudden it's like they know everything. Like, they know your opinions, they know your position, they know your moral character, etc. Mind reading. Challenge. How specifically do you know? That's the challenge to that. How specifically do you know? And that's a question that I typically would ask in like if I was talking back and forth one-on-one to somebody. A lot of times I try to ask good questions, and I just, try to ask why, or, help me understand how did you get to the picture you're seeing. Asking good questions is one of the key takeaways from this presentation tonight. Input channels, VCOG, which is an acronym. We process reality through specific inputs, the five senses: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfaction, and gustatory. So the glitch in this, people delete entire senses sometimes, such as seeing disinterest but failing to hear concern. That would be an example of deletion. People delete entire senses sometimes, such as seeing disinterest but failing to hear a concern. Synesthesia, creating representations in one channel based on input from another. And some, they refer to this as kind of your senses getting crossed. Like sometimes you'll have like the ability to taste a certain sound or smell a color, in some cases, not all. The trap. Decisions sometimes are based on incomplete sensory data. Incongruity. What is incongruity? It's when the digital message contradicts the analog message. An example, shouting, "I am not angry," with clenched fist. So, you have the body language of being angry, but you're saying you're not angry. Double bind. This is cognitive dissonance, another way of talking about cognitive dissonance. A double bind. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't trap, created by conflicting levels of communication. result paralysis or schizophrenic responses in the system. This is an act of communication. The digital content on the top, the words, the bottom, the analog, the relationship, the body and the tone. When there's an incongruent relationship between those two characters. Let's see. That sounds right there like a it sounds like a trap waiting to happen, honestly. I feel like, it's like they're gonna have cameras and stuff all inside of there, and they're probably as a matter of fact, I'm fairly certain that they need to allow some people to, cause some trouble, because then they will have actually plenty of justification to have predictive policing and have flock camera surveillance. That's why we need it. We need it because all of these people are angry. How's it going? Nice to see you. Thanks for joining, buddy. See if I can pronounce your name. Bewusterleben MKD. Bewusterleben MKD. Thanks for joining us tonight. Talking about the structure of magic, but it's talking about language, and it's talking about cognitive dissonance in the sense of incongruity between your words and your body and your tone. Yeah, I mean, for instance, all of these incidents with the correspondence dinner and now the stuff that's unfolded today, they're going to have no trouble making sure DC is locked down with a military perimeter. That way, when the gas runs out and people can't eat, that it won't be 1793 again in France. Because in 1793 in France, people lost their heads. That's what happened. The king lost his head in 1793. Yeah, it's unfortunately what's actually happening now is it's like crazy on all fronts, because basically we're building the data centers that are just going to like need us to double the entire power grid. We have to do this so that China doesn't have it, because, well, that China doesn't have it as advanced as we do. But if you're paying attention, why was it that Donald Trump took the most expensive flight in the history of the world over to China? Because it had so many billionaires on that flight. If God forbid something would have happened to that flight, that would have been a very expensive, loss. That was a very expensive flight into China. Why would Trump haul all of the tech CEOs to China, get walked all over pretty much by the president of China, and he just had to sit there and take it? And he said, yeah, we're going to be looking forward to doing business with you. That's what he said to the president of China. And so why would you bring, I have never, you don't see that many billionaires go in, to the same place and of interest. There was one biomedical guy. There's only one person in that entourage with Trump to China from a biomedical company. Now, the company supposedly will not disclose what he was doing there, and he took his own flight. He didn't fly with Trump and everybody else. This biomedical guy got himself to China, and nobody knows what he was doing there. And he was the only biomedical guy there. So the joke's on everybody. Probably going to just be China doesn't want to have the data centers in their country. Why would they want to pollute their country? So Trump is looking forward to doing business with China, and he's going to make sure that Chinese business interests can buy as much farmland as they want. So I'm not saying all of these data centers are for China, but I feel like some of them might be for China, and I feel like that might be like some business that they're going to be doing. Because as far as I have come to understand, you know, the Rockefellers promised that the future would be a Chinese dominated New World Order, as far as I understand it. And then for those of you who have seen the work that James has done, which is actually very good work, some of the best work I think that he's found is on the Lee Breakspear Dent bloodline connection, which would also explain why there's a painting or a portrait of Mao Zedong in the Vatican. So it's like, why is that a thing? And they're like, there's an old newspaper clipping, and it was like the Vatican is going to they're going to keep it there. They're going to keep this painting of Mao Zedong in the Vatican. So it's probably because the new Silk Road. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And you know what my greatest fear is? My greatest fear is that they are actually just going to... It's like, great, you perfected the smart city, human husbandry, digital surveillance grid society. All right, yeah, we'll buy it. Like, let's do it. We'll take it. It works great over there. Let's take it over here. That's my greatest fear. It's the greatest fear. But again, you know, what people don't know is that the collateral to our national debt, the collateral to that is our federal lands. It is absolutely a form of collateral for our national debt, is our national lands, federal lands. Avatars of defense, the Satir categories. Satir categories. Under stress, the map shrinks and people adopt defensive postures. The placator, I am helpless. Blamer, it's your fault. The computer, super reasonable, detached logic. The distractor, irrelevant motion, avoiding the subject. These are kind of defensive postures. So the first is the placator, who might claim, you know, I didn't cause it, I'm helpless, I didn't do it. You also have the blamer, the person who says it's your fault, not mine. The computer, who's super reasonable and has detached logic. And then you have the distractor, who has irrelevant motion and they try to avoid the subject. These are the defense postures. You know, it's kind of interesting that you bring that up. I've not really seen them knocking on, everybody please knock on wood for me and say a prayer for me that I don't see them around where I'm at. I don't have those, and I don't want those near me. And yeah, that I've seen that's crazy. That's like literally when I see those videos, it's just apocalyptic. So again, these are the avatars of defense posture. Again, under stress, the map shrinks and people adopt defensive postures, or a conservative mentality, but not conservative in the political sense. Conservative as in I don't want to change. Like, let me just keep what I'm doing right now. Resistant to change, using these four kind of strategies. Geometry of meaning. Human experience has formal notation similar to mathematics. Transformation. Changing deep to surface structure is like rotating geometric shapes. This would be called linear algebra. Inverse functions. Different linguistic inputs can yield identical psychological states. Therapy is the application of inverse functions to recover the original shape of experience. Today's echoes, digital distortion. Because if, you know, trying to explain, like if you and I are sitting in a room together and I'm just having a one-on-one conversation with you. That would be one layer of noise, of distortion. But then I'm talking to an audience right now. And again, people who will watch the video in the future. And so because it's not a one-on-one conversation and everybody will take something different from what I present, that's another layer of distortion. And it does all kind of revolve and center around language. So, take a drink. Social media algorithms automate deletion and distortion at an industrial scale. We interact with surface structures such as headlines and tweets, the emotion, losing the deep structure, the nuance, and the humanity. The danger, operating on an impoverished map, leads to limited choices. The opportunity, using the meta model to question the narrative, such as ask yourself, according to whom? Who benefits? Why? How did you get to where? How did you get to the mental image you have? How did you develop your perception of this? Asking questions. It's all about asking questions. And I mean this in a, if you're making conversation with somebody, but in the very same way that I mean asking good questions is a good way to, develop ideas with people. It's the same idea as prompting, to prompt something. It's all depends on how well you can articulate the problem. This is the same idea. This is precisely the same idea. Oh my God, that's great. You said data centers almost appear as the pirate ship from the Goonies movie. That's pretty good. Data centers almost appear as the pirate ship from the Goonies movie. That's great. Hiding data centers near the old abandoned restaurant. Yeah, like the White House ballroom, the Golden Dome ballroom, the surveillance dome, underground data center. You're right. They're hiding them, the real important stuff. These are just the low, the data centers that people will be targeting and allowed to target will be the ones that are hosting nothing important. That'll be hosting stuff for the local city that you're in. And that's what happens, unfortunately. All of these people who think they're fighting back, what happens is they actually just hurt nobody that they wanted to hurt. And they hurt, basically, the only people they hurt are the people that they claim they're doing it for. It's because, unfortunately, I mean, it's like a lot of these people don't even know who they're up against. They don't know, you can't fight an enemy if you don't know their battle plans, as Bill Cooper used to say. So the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Magic is hidden in the language we speak. Magic is not as mystical as it seems. It is a complex human activity with a structure. If you understand the structure, grammar, the VCOG framework, which we didn't cover as much in depth, congruity, you can replicate the magic. Goal, growth. The goal is growth, increasing choices and enriching the model of the world. It's because, as Kathy O'Brien, who wrote, the Transformation of America, who's a monarch programming survivor, she said, knowledge is the only defense against mind control. The person who tells me they're not gonna get me, that I already know that you're gonna be the first person that they get, because that's very clearly, if you think that you're immune, you're not immune. It doesn't work that way. You have to know about these things, and you have to always tell yourself that it's could, you have to be vigilant. You have to always be vigilant for these things. So to reclaim your territory, question the map. Your perception is a simulation based on your sensory input. Challenge it. Check the channels. Are you seeing but not hearing? Match the predicates to communicate. Match the other person's reality, or understand the other person's reality. Let's see, let me go into my notes. I got more notes on this too that I can bring up. Yeah, so let's see. So again, the 5 input channels are your visual, auditory, kinesthetic, your primary input channels are these 3, the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Primary sensory receptors for the visual, cones and rods. Your eyes and your vision are actually one of the more advanced. It's very, very advanced. And fascinatingly enough, there is a great deal of connection between early occultism and fascination with optics and vision. So the visual representation system. Again, so what you're doing is you're mapping your 5 input channels, and you're mapping them to representational systems. Representation, again, remember that's the phantasm, that's a ghost, because you're representing this sensory input to yourself, because that fundamentally, that's what the computer of the mind does, is it takes in all of this information. But again, we don't have the ability to see 100%. We only see like 20% of this totally. So this here is the mapping between 100%, and that 100% gets squashed down into these 3 manners of representation, and these 3 manners together comprise about 20%, whatever the conscious awake part of your mind comprises. Complex patterns and input examples in the visual representational system. A texture, a synthesis of visual and kinesthetic with an occasional bit of auditory. It's denoting V, A, and K, because what you're doing is you're turning these into I guess you could call it a vector in mathematical terms. You could represent this data with 3 different variables. Auditory, obviously your ears, auditory receptors, stores input as sounds, rhythms, and language, distinctly categorized into digital, meaning the words themselves, the content, versus the analogical, tonality versus tempo. Natural language obviously arises from your auditory representational system, the mapping of sensory experience into words. Kinesthetic, proprioceptors, the deep senses. Pressure, temperature, and pain receptors, storing input as body sensations, visceral feelings, or tactile pressure. Wetness, a recurring pattern of stimulation from multiple kinesthetic receptors. So a practitioner must evaluate what's called the most highly valued representational system, the dominant system unique to the individual. Which one do they value the most for representing and thus gaining and formulating the map about the territory, the map of the territory. See, let me catch up on what everybody's saying. Yeah, some people are really upset about the anti-data center people, and then others are mad at the data center deniers. Yeah, it seems to be everything is into a dialectic now. And this, I'm for the most part, I feel like I am of the belief that most of the time the division lines are kind of this, they're becoming more of the same. Like people are divided almost along the same lines, because again, everything's been justified over last 10 to 15 years on going back into nostalgia for the past. It's like, did the past ever exist? Maybe, probably not. And that's the idea. It's like this division is working its way into deep parts of people's minds and lives. And it's actually just based on a specter, a representation on a global societal scale. The Anti-Techno Enslavement Society is Ted K under the Mountain Doomers, and the Ike's Whole Secret Pentagon is really under there too. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's tons of stuff like that. It's crazy what people just don't even know about. And as a matter of fact, they're talking about apparently, I've only seen it just today, but there's apparently a giant sinkhole in Kentucky. So I'll have to look more into that. Probably because they've been building those like crazy, if I had to guess. So for instance, say a musician who is auditory dominant and a painter who's visually dominant will have fundamentally different experiences of the same sunset. Absolutely. These maps define the limits of the possible. Signals of incongruity occur when these internal maps are in conflict. The strategist must distinguish between the digital, the linguistic content, and the analogical, tonality, tempo, posture, and gesture. That actually reminds me, now that I just read that, I was going to show you a dictionary that I have discovered. It's called it's perfect for what we're talking about right now, if I can find it. Yes, the non-verbal dictionary. It's called the non-verbal dictionary from 2002 of gestures, signs, and body language cues. Adam's apple jump, a body movement, a conspicuous up and down motion of the Adam's apple, a movement of the throat visible while gulping or swallowing as in nervousness. So this is 781 pages, talks about associations. Again, the amygdala has to do with why your sense of smell can trigger strong emotions. Let's go to, well, it's 111 in the morning for me, so I go to page 111, feet. It talks about feet. It talks about dance, like walking, shrugging your shoulders, I guess shoulder shrug display. Yeah, so it's talking about that would be an example of analogical. Yes, you're absolutely right. Switzerland, when they're smashing these particles together, I am very much concerned because there was a lawsuit that tried to prevent CERN from booting up, that said, hey, there's going to be some big damage that takes place if you do this. And the court just dismissed the lawsuit because they didn't have the jurisdiction. So they didn't even investigate the guy's claims. But the more and more I look at it, I think it's very possible that when you're smashing particles together, especially, this is a subject for a different time, but to back up what I'm saying, if you want to know what weird stuff happens when you smash particles together, just look into a virtual photon or a virtual particle. A virtual particle, you can never see it and you can never measure it, but you just have to have faith that it exists. And what it does is it actually just creates itself out of nothing in the faster than the speed of light to make all of the quantum equations work and to make sure that the math works and resolves correctly. And so you can't ever see it, but you just have to know that it exists, because if it doesn't exist, all of the quantum physics falls apart. And apparently you get this virtual photon when you smash particles together. So yeah, maybe very, very, very possible that maybe you don't want to turn that on unless you know more about that. But they're like, nah, we don't have jurisdiction. Turn it on. Turn it on. And here we are. Identifying a client's dominant system of representation depends on tracking their predicates. Predicates, the verbs, adjectives, and adverbs associated with these three domains: the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic. We specifically watch for para messages, which are simultaneous messages across different output channels. When para messages conflict, such as placating verbal message delivered with a blaming tonality, the client is signaling internal incongruity. Diagnostic checklist. The modality: visual checkpoints. And on the right hand side, we have diagnostic checkpoints, analogical indicators. So visual checkpoints, eye fixation patterns, which is what this was all about, talking about these different things. How people are moving their eyes and what patterns. Facial muscle tensions, eyebrows, mouth, cheeks. Body symmetry, comparing the right side against the left. Head, neck, and shoulder alignment. Auditory checkpoints: analogical tonality, harsh versus soft, tempo, rapid versus slow, volume and intonation. Digital, specific predicates such as I see, I hear, I feel, in syntactic structures. You said, I keep coming up with ways to deliver viruses to the moon. Thievul will drive a Tesla Roadster to the moon with hantavirus in his dirty velvet hat, American tail. Pretty much. The deer mouse. Okay. The deer mouse. Well, this last year has been insane. I actually kind of admire how much insanity they can cram into a year, because I've never seen them cram this much insanity into a year. not yet. So, okay, these are the defensive structures again. So the way a client structures their language and posture reveal their internal state. Strategic diagnosis relies on mapping Virginia Satir's communication categories to their most frequent representational correlates. So again, the first was the placator, the kinesthetic correlate. The syntactic pattern, a high use of qualifiers, if, only, and just. In the subjunctive mood, could, would, frequently mind reading violations. Posture, slumped, palms up, whining voice. Category 2, the blamer, visual correlate, their syntactic pattern. Universal quantifiers, such as all, every, always, and negative questions, such as why don't you? Frequent cause and effect violations. Posture, erect, finger pointing, harsh tonality. Category 3, the computer, super reasonable, auditory correlate. Syntactic pattern, deletion of the experiencer, such as it is disturbing versus I am disturbed. A high use of nominalizations, frustration and stress, and nouns without referential indices, such as it and people. Grab a drink. Deletion of the experiencer, high use of nominalizations, and nouns without referential indices, it and people. Posture, motionless, steel rod spine, dry, monotone voice. My voice is dry right now, but I'm super reasonable too, so. These signals indicate the emergence of internal polarities, disconnected parts of the client's model that are no longer in communication. The mechanics of incongruity, fuzzy functions and polarities, which, the same thing comes up in the breath wars dynamic, because polarities, putting somebody into a state of cognitive dissonance, destruction by dialectic. Again, as we just talked about a moment ago, people who are for the data centers, people who are against the data centers. In breath wars, that can be used as a means to extract and harvest breath, or conscious free intent, or free energy, and a free consent, in the sense of, once you know the truth, you are free to make a choice. That's free consent. A critical clinical target is the fuzzy function. These are neurological short circuits that bypass conscious processing, specifically see, feel, or hear, feel circuits. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, guys. You guys ever seen that before? Neurological short circuits that bypass conscious processing, specifically when people see and feel or hear and feel stuff. When these circuits are rigid, the client loses touch with their actual ongoing kinesthetic experience, instead allowing external visual or auditory input to trigger a feelings state, emotional, automatically. These short circuits are the root of psychosomatic distress, as seen in the case of Martha, who beat her child because a minor visual stimulus, the child doing something wrong, triggered an uncontrollable hear-feel loop of worthlessness and rage. Semantic ill-formedness, linguistic reflections of fuzzy functions. Cause and effect. The client represents a stimulus as causing their internal state, such as, I see you smiling and it makes me feel mocked. The client has zero choice over their emotional response. Mind reading. The client distorts input channels to match internal feelings, such as, I feel bad, therefore I know you're thinking that I am worthless. Polarities, the internal split. Polarities are inconsistent models of the world held by the same individual. Again, cognitive dissonance. In the case of Ellen, she presented two distinct polarities regarding her father, a visual blamer, presenting with erect finger pointing, yelling, why don't you ever do what I want, is what he would say. And a kinesthetic placator, slumped, palms up, whining, I try as hard as I can to please you. These are not bad, quote-unquote, parts. They are disconnected resources that must be sorted before they can be integrated. And a lot of times, this would be a big source of problems. As it says, it's not bad, it's a disconnect, and the disconnect is somehow a little bit worse than just bad. Let's see. Let me catch up on what everybody's saying. We got to trust the Musk to have a successful payload by rocket to the moon before we get a mouse to drive a Tesla Roadster rocket there. I feel like we could probably get the mouse there first if we really wanted to. We can do very surprising things when we want to, because there's no limits on money being spent and, just evil behind the stuff going on today. There's no limit to it. Absolute power and absolute money corrupt, absolutely. And there's no limits on anything being done today. They deny the scam of money everyone pays for the surveillance. I know, that's absolutely true. It's getting to the point, though, where it's like they refuse. See, that's, I guess, pertinent to the conversation very much. They are disconnected. That's what, you could call a split mind or diabolic schizophrenia. So let's go ahead and bring that up. What is diabolic schizophrenia? Let's add it up. I presented this, I think, the other day. There we go. Diabolic schizophrenia is the ultimate weapon of the animus delendi, the desire to destroy, by forcing the human intellect to hold contradictory realities simultaneously. Demons trap the victim in a relativistic lukewarm paralysis. The human victim becomes a completely disconnected, highly suggestible node, incapable of accessing objective reality and perfectly primed to be controlled, blackmailed, or driven to suicide, possibly, by their preternatural handlers. Preternatural, it means mind-bending, but still somehow within the bounds of natural reality. So basically, a preternatural assumes that God is still at the top of the pyramid hierarchy of control of what goes on. The cognitive butchery manifests through a profound double-mindedness and inability or instability. Because of the constant demonic interference, the victim's true unified personality never properly develops. Instead, the mind is split into two primary demonic vectors of control, those being one, the rejection altar, inward implosion. This fractured part of the psyche is driven by demons to turn the human against itself, enforcing a reality of self-rejection, suicide, guilt, shame, inferiority, depression, and lust. Second, the rebellion altar, which is outward explosion. The secondary fracture turns the human against external reality, against truth and divine order, manifesting through accusation, selfishness, pride, hatred, violence, control, and witchcraft. Diabolic schizophrenia. And that's like the worst case scenario of like all of what we've talked about in the structure of magic. Basically, when these are all pushed to the extreme, or when they're never addressed. Because, you know, the ultimate unforgivable sin, denial of the Holy Spirit, is pretty much, you know, I have the answer now, I don't need anything else. Because then, if you will not ever consider that you have issues in those respects, these different ways that we represent reality to ourselves, if you are never open into correcting those things, well then, yeah, it's unforgivable because you just won't ask to be forgiven, in a sense of speaking. You know, ask and it will be given, seek and ye shall find. Well, if I have the answer already, I don't need to ask and I don't need to look for anything because I've already got it. So you see, now if that's what you got to do to get it, now you're never going to get it because you don't think you need to do those things. Utilizing the meta model and spatial sorting, intervention requires sorting. The strategist must facilitate a well-formed split, clearly separating the conflicting polarities, denominalizing the model. The strategist uses meta-model techniques to challenge the limits of the client's model. When a client uses model operators of necessity or possibility, such as I can't, it's impossible, they are identifying a lack of choice. The therapist must denominalize these experiences to recover the reference structure. So a challenge, an example would be, what stops you? Recovering the deleted cause. Another challenge, what would happen if you did? Recovering the deleted effect. Polarity questions, active command checklist. The practitioner must use the following checklist to force contact between the parts. Examples, these are quotes. What specifically do you want for yourself? How specifically does the other polarity stop you, or the other extreme? This is black and white thinking we're talking about it when we say polarity. Is there any way that you see, hear, feel that the other polarity extreme can be of use to you? What would happen if the other extreme or polarity were to go away completely? Do you ever see, hear, or feel what the other polarity wants? The chair switching technique. The therapist must take an active, disruptive role. The client physically moves between chairs, representing different polarities. The therapist must interrupt the client to enforce the predicate shift, ensuring that they use the VAK, visual, auditory, kinesthetic words appropriate to that chair, and posture shift. By playing the polarities against each other, the therapist moves the client towards a meta position. In the case of Tom, the authors played his polarities so aggressively against each other that Tom reached a point of control, screaming, "Shut up!" A pivotal moment where he achieved meta position by taking control of the parts. Achieving the meta position in the final integration. The meta position is a state of control where the client recognizes their internal parts as resources rather than sources of pain. Ritualized integration methodologies. The parts party, a psychodramatic technique where group members play the client's parts using anchors like famous names. The client observes the interactions from the outside, gaining a meta view of their internal dynamics. The family huddle, a ritualized kinesthetic integration where family members or parts physically touch to signal a new start and sensory-based connection. Again, when we say family members or parts, we mean different parts of representation. The formal process of recoding. The strategist facilitates the final recoding. The client takes control of the parts, recognizing the unique abilities of each. The therapist facilitates a ritual, often having the client hold the defined abilities of the parts in their hands, and delicately weaves them together. This integrated representation is then spread throughout the kinesthetic system, such as the body, the eyes, the breath, ensuring the new unified model is fully embodied. Homework and ecological validity. To ensure change persists, assignments must be designed by the client or family to ensure ecological validity. Assignments must utilize the new choices developed in therapy. The process of designing homework is itself a resource, empowering the client to recognize their own creative coping skills. Like I said, and putting all this together to teach to everybody is an example of that. The conclusion: the therapist is not a traditional healer, but a guide using the natural processes of representation. By identifying fuzzy functions, sorting polarities, and enforcing a meta position, the therapist transforms stuck, repetitive patterns into generative, creative living. The goal is to move the client from a state of low vitality into one of sensory-based coupling and expanded choice. So, yeah. I appreciate everybody. Let's see who can conceal my power level. How's everybody doing tonight? Thanks for being with us. James is out on vacation right now, so I'm filling in with him. But yeah, guys, unfortunately, you joined in right at the end, but I definitely encourage you to restart the video because we covered a lot tonight, actually, I think. So, what is all of this in summary? In summary, what we're talking about in a basic introduction, because I'm probably going to follow up with this, and we're going to talk maybe about a parallel topic, because, you know, the thing that's most ignored in therapy or trying to improve way of being, living behavior is the internal, you know, mantra, the internal dialogue. One could call it the mythology, the program you operate on. When you say program, who are you? What is your role? You know, do you have family who does this? Do you have a business? Like, what is your role? That is your program. Because you get up and you do this every day. That's your program. And so, in that context, how do you correct behavior? How do you change your own behavior? Well, sure, you can start with some of the more well-known methods, but the deepest and most important part to that is understanding the language that you use. And that is what is referred to by the meta model perspective, the meta perspective. Metacognition means thinking about how you think. But this integrates the linguistic perspective. It's very heavy on the linguistic side. That's what makes this text that we covered, the structure of magic. Actually, let me see if I can put it back up. I think I actually have it. No. One moment. Here it is. Wanted to put the book back up so everybody could see it. Yeah, the structure of magic. This is the text that we looked at. Oh. Yeah, there we go. The text that we looked at tonight. That's the structure of magic. And it talks about how language indicators can be used to help people understand the map versus the territory. The map is what you perceive and how you perceive versus the territory, what it actually is. And you map that to yourself, and you present your sensory input to yourself, you know, through some type of internal dialogue. It doesn't necessarily, you know, there's a great debate on internal monologue or not. And I have been surprised to hear certain people say, like, they'll be like, I don't have it. And I'm like, man, that actually kind of surprises me. And I've seen people who can be pretty smart who claim that they don't have it. And so I'm not completely convinced that I'm not sure that that's the only way it can manifest. This idea of synesthesia, you know, people who can experience these in unusual ways, you know, it's hard for me to understand how somebody without an internal monologue would see things. But that's because I have it. And so maybe they understand these things slightly differently. And perhaps some more heavy on the words, some less heavy on the words. But when you're dealing with, you know, therapy and trying to correct behavior, you have to work through it that way. I appreciate that. Thank you. You said that King Ravana on YouTube says this has been a great broadcast. Boots says, don't forget to hit the like button. Yes, don't forget to hit the like button, the subscribe button on whatever platform you're on. If there's not a like button, feel free to share the video with if you have friends who would be interested in it. But yeah, it really helps us out. I know that it helps the video get, usually the more people who like a video, it gets more views, at least on my YouTube channel. Substack, I mean, Substack with likes, I haven't quite figured out yet. I haven't quite figured out how the Substack out, like I haven't got the sensitivities of the Substack algorithm yet. But yeah, I appreciate it. I will be back with you guys tomorrow. James will probably be back Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe sooner. Just depends on whenever he ends up heading back. So I'll be with you guys for the next couple of nights. But I hope you guys learned something new, because if you learn something new in everything that you do, nothing can be a worthless experience. I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good night, stay safe, and God bless you all. Take care.